a novel about the long consequences of trauma and loss, set amongst a group of gay friends in Chicago at the very beginning of the AIDS epidemic. We've had a big response to this. Just a couple here before I hand it over to my panellists. Now, this is brilliant, and this was recommended to me by a former producer, Zara Potts, and this is Into Thin Air by John Krakauer, an excellent read about the ill-fated Everest climbing season that took the life of Kiwi climber guide Rob Hall. That is an unmissable book. I couldn't even put it down once. And just another here, Wallace, there's a book called A Fraction of the Whole, a novel by Steve Toltz, an Australian story, very funny and brilliant, shortlisted for the Booker. It's the perfect distraction. You won't be able to put it down. Liam, you first. Have you got a couple for us?
Well, I was going to say The Plague by Camus, but if we're wanting people to not be depressed, then I would say, actually, I've given it a lot of thought. And a book that I finished recently was Richard Hooker, MASH, you know, the novel from which the TV series and movies sprang. And it's because it's like a war mentality we've got at the moment, the alternating terror and boredom. And MASH is a great book. It's very humorous all through it, and it's about the importance of levity and humour in the face of the worst that the world can throw at us.
Nice. Sounds fantastic.
Nice. What was it again? Say it again.
MASH by Richard Hooker.
Richard Hooker.
What a pro.
Right.
Thank you for that,
Love
Richard Hooker.
Love it.
How about you, Michelle?
I'm reading Renee's These Two Hands, which is one of the most uplifting books. My friend Catherine Robertson told me that it would be, and she was absolutely right. And so that's a beautiful memoir by New Zealand writer Renee. And I also have on my brand new Kindle, I've got the books that I was reading in preparation for the Auckland Writers' Festival, which is no longer happening. And amongst those is Leanne Moriarty's Big Little Lies and also Nine Perfect Strangers. And I just like stories about women killing men. I don't know what that is, but I find them uplifting and relaxing. So I'm doing a bit of that.
Right.
How are you all feeling?
Felicity says, Wallace, just reading Elizabeth Knox's new book, The Absolute Book. So great, escapist, weird, and super readable, and it's long, which I love because it's not finishing too soon. Stay well.
Nice.
There are so many people who've recommended me that book. I must read it. But it's interesting, Liam, isn't it? Because you've got to get the right book, because the thing about COVID-19 is that, I think Thomas Price did this the other day, that he's gone down the wormhole with this, quite anxious.
Yes.
So you do need that type of book which has got real stickability, that you just need to turn the pages, right?
Yeah.
Yes, you need to create a world that seems so real and that you're so deep into, you forget that everybody in the rest of the world
You
is
need
going
to escape.
crazy. Can I just say, if you are going to read Camus' The Plague, could you read it on a Kindle or wrap something around the cover? Because I don't want to sit on a bus and see somebody holding a book that's called The Plague. It's just going to make me uncomfortable.
Tell you what, it's a good read though, isn't it, Liam?
Oh, it asks all the right questions.
Yep.
I don't know if it supplies all the answers, but it asks all the right questions.
Books to read in isolation: A Gentleman in Moscow by Amor Tolls.
Nice.
1920s Russia. An aristocrat put under house arrest at the Metropole Hotel for the rest of his life.
There'd be some curtsying in there, wouldn't there? It sounds
Sure
like
there would
there'd be
be,
a bit of curtsying. I love it.
Michelle Acord, Liam here. Thank you so much for your company this afternoon on the panel.
Lovely to
My
be
pleasure.
here.
Yeah, great to have you on. I'm back tomorrow, 3:45. Checkpoint next. Stay well, stay safe. See you then.
Te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irarangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E haere ake nei, the call goes out to Kiwis offshore. Get home now before it's too late. Recent travellers returning from coronavirus hotspots, including Australia and the UK, add to our COVID-19 tally, which has now reached 20. Dob them in. Immigration asks Kiwis to report tourists who flout self-isolation laws to a lockdown in Christchurch, and they're hunting for about half a dozen others. International traveller numbers are down almost 50% at Auckland Airport, and New Zealand's flu vaccine campaign kicks off 2 weeks early. So who is the top priority? And Australia bans residents from travelling overseas for at least 6 months. You can watch us live on Facebook. RNZ News at 5. Kia ora ko Susana Leata with DNA. The number of coronavirus cases has almost doubled to 20, but health officials don't yet know how many hundreds of other people could have been exposed. The Ministry of Health today announced a further 8 cases, which are now spread through most main centres. The Director General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield, says the spike is due to travellers coming home as countries lock down their borders and impose travel bans.
We've got more people coming from overseas who have come from areas where there is COVID-19 transmission in the community. You'll have heard the WHO Director General a few days ago describe Europe as the new global hotspot. Some of these people have come from Europe, some from Australia and some from the USA.
Dr Bloomfield says the risk of a community outbreak is still low. Just yesterday, more than 4,500 New Zealanders returned from overseas. A New Zealander travelling through Europe has been left stranded in the Balkans after his last-minute flight home was cancelled. Jonathan Mcleod has been backpacking through Europe and is staying at a hostel in Macedonia. He booked flights back to New Zealand after the government urged travellers to return, but Macedonia's land borders have closed and his departing flight has been cancelled.
I don't feel in any imminent or immediate danger. So for now I'm okay. I'm not, obviously it's not an ideal situation, but yeah, not in any immediate danger. And so not needing rescuing just quite yet.
Jonathan Mcleod, who was stranded in Macedonia. The Deputy Prime Minister says the 80,000 New Zealanders overseas need to hurry up if they want to get home before flights start grinding to a halt. Winston Peters says New Zealanders overseas need to act.
Alerting everybody that we can to the fact that transportation options are closing up real fast and they could be stranded there, so they need to think about it real hard now.
Winston Peters. Police officers have made spot checks on more than 40 tourists to check if they are self-isolating under the COVID-19 rules that came in on Monday. They visited 41 people from a randomly sampled group of travellers yesterday and will check on another 3 today. The police say most are taking isolation seriously. However, at least 3 tourists who failed to self-isolate have been taken into custody. A police officer accused of raping his colleague in Northland has been found guilty. The 29-year-old swore and cried in the dock as the unanimous guilty verdicts brought in his Auckland District Court trial to a close. Annika Smith reports.
The man was accused of groping the woman during a boozy night with colleagues at a kitty motel last February. It was the Crown's case he didn't take no for an answer after trying it on with her, and later crept into her room and raped her as she slept. This afternoon, after 4 hours of deliberations, the jury found him guilty of indecent assault and sexual violation. The verdicts were met with tears from the defendant's family in the public gallery, and the man, whose identity remains secret on appeal, covered his face in shock on hearing the result. He will be sentenced in April. Ko Annika Smith aho.
And the police have revealed they investigated 4 officers during the Waitangi Day celebrations, during which the policewoman was raped. The Green Party has failed in its attempt to reverse a blunder which resulted in safe zones being dumped from abortion legislation. The proposed law, which removes abortion from the Crimes Act, is going through its 3rd and final reading. The bill originally allowed safe zones of 150 metres to be set up around abortion clinics. Last week, a voting mix-up resulted in that provision being axed. The Greens' Marama Davidson this afternoon requested Parliament reinstate safe zones, but MPs voted 77 to 43 against that. The New Zealand stock market has run out of steam after rising 6% in early trading, but still ending the day only just in positive territory. The NZX Top 50 index opened strongly for the first time in nearly 2 weeks after the United States main indices all closed up. But the Australian market opened down, dragging down the NZX with it. The local stock market closed up 0.2%. It's coming up to 4.5 minutes past 5. New Zealand Rugby say a domestic competition to replace a suspended Super Rugby tournament could start in 2 weeks, with more details expected of the tournament to be played in empty stadiums. Meanwhile, all community rugby has been postponed. Union Chief Executive Mark Robinson believes the Rugby Union can run a domestic Super Rugby competition and still keep the players safe, but not at club or community level.
super teams are in very closed environments. They are getting tested and monitored every day. That's very different to a community game where we have no ability to do that. We have very fluid situations of young people involved in the game in a wide range of different communities, all interacting with each other. So our ability to control that environment just simply doesn't exist.
Mark Robinson. The Wellington Phoenix say they've tried to make their players as comfortable as possible during their isolation period in Sydney. The side left for Australia today, where they'll start a 14-day isolation period before rejoining the A-League. Operations manager Sean Gill says training will keep them occupied.
We've done a lot of work to make sure that the players are going to be as comfortable as possible, and mentally it's not going to be as taxing on them as it can be, including putting the stuff in place for the families back here. So we're pretty confident we can get this done, and the playing group has been absolutely amazing. They're behind it 100%.
Sean Gill of the Phoenix. That's the news.
Governments inject cash to immunise economies.
So we're going big, and that's the way it'll be, and that's the way everybody seems to like it on the Hill.
This is evolving day by day, week by week. We've pulled together a $12 billion package in just over a week.
While others prepare for battle.
Nous sommes en guerre.
We are at war, a health war.
This enemy can be deadly, but it is also beatable.
Your daily dose of news, Morning Report, weekdays from 6 on air and online.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland to North Taranaki, including Coromandel Peninsula, Bay of Plenty, Taumaranui and Taupo. Mainly fine today. Occasional showers spreading north tomorrow. For South Taranaki to Kapiti Coast, including Taihape, cloud increasing from tonight. Isolated showers retreating to the Tararua Ranges in the morning. Showers spreading through Horowhenua and Kapiti tomorrow evening. Gisborne to Wairarapa, also Wellington, partly cloudy. A few showers in Hawke's Bay and Gisborne, and 1 or 2 for northern Wellington overnight, becoming fine everywhere by morning. To Nelson, Marlborough, Canterbury and North Otago, mainly fine. High cloud at times tomorrow. For the rest of Otago and Southland, mostly fine today with evening showers about Stewart Island. Showers spreading north tomorrow. For Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, cloudy periods and isolated showers. Rain for Fiordland from tonight, spreading north tomorrow. Chatham Islands, cloudy periods, chance of a light shower. RNZ National. It's coming up to 7.5 minutes past 5.
Thanks, Susanna. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Come home before it's too late. A stark warning from the government to New Zealanders overseas as it battles to contain the coronavirus. It comes as the number of cases of COVID-19 rose today to 20, the biggest rise so far in a single day. The 8 new cases include a Waikato man in his 70s who arrived from Europe on Sunday, March 15th, a woman in her 20s who arrived from Sydney on Sunday the 8th of March, a Canterbury woman in her 40s who arrived from London on Monday, March 16th, an Invercargill man in his 40s who arrived from the Gold Coast on Thursday, March 5th, and 2 men in their 60s, both from Auckland. One travelled from Canada on Thursday, March 12th, and one from San Francisco on Friday, March 13. The latter arrived on NZ 007. An Auckland woman in her 40s who also arrived from Europe on Monday, March 9th, and a man in his 50s from Auckland who had travelled extensively through Europe. The Ministry of Health says it's continuing to update its website with flight details of all those travellers, but the Director General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield, reiterated recent passengers should take the new border and self-isolation restrictions seriously.
These restrictions are not retrospective, but I urge others who have arrived earlier from overseas to voluntarily self-isolate and, of course, be aware of what symptoms could be of COVID-19 and that they should ring Healthline or call ahead to their general practitioner for testing if they think that is warranted and to get advice.
Last night, a student from Logan Park High School in Dunedin was confirmed as the 12th person with the virus. The teenager became infected after his father returned from Germany and was confirmed with COVID. Dr. Bloomfield says the student developed symptoms over the weekend but attended school on Monday, forcing the school to close, and many students have been sent into self-isolation.
There are around 150 close contacts. After discussion and consideration this morning with the Prime Minister's Chief Science Advisor, the Ministry's Chief Science Advisor and the local Medical Officer of Health, and because this is the first positive case within a school, we have decided, in addition to the self-isolation, that these close contacts will be tested over the next 24 hours to ensure that there are no other positive cases. This is a unique situation, and it is part of our precautionary approach that we have taken all along with our response to COVID-19.
Dr Bloomfield says the school will remain closed until after the weekend, when most of the results will be back. Around 50 tourists were also spot-checked by police to ensure they were complying with self-isolation rules.
Police visually citing those people who were expected to be in self-isolation and asking a series of questions relating to their well-being while self-isolating. They made contact with 41 individuals yesterday, and another 3 people are being followed up today because they could not be reached at the time. More visits will be conducted, and both the police and, of course, ourselves are very pleased with the high level of compliance. It was clear with people taking this self-isolation requirement seriously.
Dr Bloomfield says additional restrictions are also being considered following Australia's decision to ban gatherings over 100 people. If you are travelling overseas, come home now before it's too late. That's the message from the government as borders and transport links across the world shut down because of COVID-19. New Zealanders in Europe, the UK, the United States and Australia are scrambling to book flights home, some forking out thousands of dollars to get back as soon as possible. The Foreign Minister, Winston Peters, estimates there are about 80,000 New Zealanders travelling internationally at the moment, and he's warning not all of them will make it. And as our reporter Katie Scotcher reports, there was much confusion at Heathrow Airport this morning as New Zealanders found they could no longer board an Air New Zealand flight home transiting in Los Angeles.
Like many others, Whakatane man Hayden Reid and his partner have decided to cut short their 6-week holiday in Europe. But getting home isn't easy. They were among a long line of New Zealanders at London's Heathrow Airport, stopped from boarding a flight home via Los Angeles because of US border restrictions.
People were crying. There was a mad rush to try and figure out how on earth you were going to get home because Air New Zealand's hands were completely tied. I mean, this has got nothing to do with them. They're being subjected to forces totally outside their control.
Hayden Reid says people were pushing into lines as they frantically tried to rebook on other airlines. He and some of the others were able to get flights home on Emirates over the next few days.
The first 2 or 3 days were almost immediately sold out. But that's just the people who are at the airport. There must be hundreds, if not thousands, of people who are trying to get back to New Zealand.
The Foreign Minister, Winston Peters, says people need to act sooner rather than later.
Alerting everybody that we can to the fact that transportation options are closing up real fast and they could be stranded there, so they need to think about it real hard now.
Winston Peters says Plan A is to get people home on commercial flights. Beyond that, Mr Peters says they are considering all other options. Jonathan Mcleod is one of those struggling to make it back to New Zealand. He's been backpacking through Europe for the past few months. He's one of only 2 travellers staying at a backpackers in Macedonia and booked flights back after hearing MFAT's call to return home. But the country's land borders have closed and his flight has been cancelled.
I don't feel in any imminent or immediate danger. So for now I'm okay. I'm not, obviously it's not an ideal situation, but yeah, not in any immediate danger, and so not needing rescuing just quite yet.
Nicholas Pointen and his partner moved to the UK just a few weeks ago. He has since developed symptoms of COVID-19 and has gone into self-isolation for 14 days.
We want to come home as soon as possible, but now we have to wait 2 weeks before we do so, and there's a fear in the back of our minds that although we've booked a flight on April the 1st, there's a chance that that flight could be cancelled. So it's pretty stressful at the moment.
Linda Brendish has lived in Los Angeles for several years, but she's now considering travelling home to be with her mother.
Do I stay and hope she's okay, or hope that I can get home if she gets sick, or do I kind of preempt it all and figure it out and go home to New Zealand, knowing that I then might have trouble to get back to LA to resume my life here?
Holly Gervin-Russell is set to fly home from Australia on Monday after she quit her job and booked flights late last week. She takes immunosuppressants and fears she won't be able to fight the virus if she's infected. Holly says her biggest concern is finding a safe place to self-isolate when she arrives.
I'm just sending out lots of messages to see if anyone's got a batch or an empty house that I can go and isolate in, because I can't go and live with my parents because my grandparents spend a lot of time there and I don't want to be around them if I've got a risk of having the virus. And then my flat that my partner lives in that I would go to has 3 people living there, so it's going to be a bit hard to self-isolate there.
Every person entering New Zealand is required to self-isolate for 2 weeks. Travellers who fail to comply with self-isolation requirements are liable for deportation. Mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi nei, ko Katie Scott Churaho.
Now, in respect of that confusion experienced at Heathrow Airport this morning, this is when a number of people could no longer board an Air New Zealand flight home transiting in Los Angeles. This is New Zealanders wanting to get on that flight. We asked Air New Zealand for clarification. Now, they've come back saying latest travel restrictions imposed by the US government as of Tuesday, 17 March at 3:59 a.m. They prohibit anyone who has been in China, Iran or 26 European countries, the United Kingdom and Ireland, within 14 days of intended travel from landing. US citizens and aircrew are exempt from this. So this seems to mean if you are a New Zealander, you don't have dual citizenship, if you are heading home from London, you cannot land in the US. You can't transit in there. The email goes on to say if you are not a US citizen, you need to travel back to New Zealand via Asia or the Middle East. We're asking them for clarification about how they communicated that to their passengers because there seems to be a lot of confusion there. We'll keep you up to date. But do get in touch if you have a family member who is stuck as a consequence of that. What were you told? When did you find out? You can text us on 2101. Tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. How are you going to get home now? The message from Australia's Prime Minister earlier this afternoon is do not travel overseas. Scott Morrison has implemented an indefinite ban on overseas travel as part of a range of new measures his government is taking to tackle the coronavirus pandemic. Limits are also being put on the number of people allowed at indoor gatherings. There'll be no more handshaking, no more hugging, and he had stern words for those stockpiling at the supermarket too. The ABC's Jade McMillan with this report from Canberra.
The Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, says life is changing in Australia as it is around the world, that this is a 1-in-100-year event and a type of challenge we haven't seen since the end of the Second World War. Now, the federal government has declared a human biosecurity emergency. The Prime Minister says that shouldn't alarm people, but that it follows similar actions taken by the states and territories. Australia's travel advice has been raised to its highest level for the entire world. That's the first time that's ever happened. The advice to every Australian now is not to travel overseas. And for those Australians who are already overseas and want to come home, they're being warned to do so as soon as possible. The government has also announced today that non-essential gatherings of more than 100 people indoors have been banned. That doesn't apply to places like airports, public transport, medical facilities and supermarkets. They are considered essential gatherings, but this follows a ban on outdoor gatherings of more than 500 people. There'll also be extra restrictions at aged care facilities. Visits will be limited to 2 people at a time per day. There'll be no large social gatherings inside those facilities, and children 16 years old or younger are being told that they should only visit as an exception because of concerns that they might not be showing symptoms at that age and could pass the virus on to the most vulnerable. Now, there has been a lot of concern about whether schools should be shut down. Many parents are already pulling their children out of class. But Mr Morrison says the advice to the government at this stage is that mass school closures should not happen.
Whatever we do, we've got to do for at least 6 months. 6 months. So that means the disruption that would occur from the closure of schools around this country, make no mistake, would be severe. What do I mean by severe? Tens of thousands of jobs could be lost, if not more. The impact on the availability of health workers, a 30% impact on the availability of health workers is our advice. That will put people's lives at risk.
Well, the government insists there will not be any kind of broad lockdown in Australia. The Chief Medical Officer, Brendan Murphy, says a 2 to 4 week shutdown of society isn't recommended by any of the government's experts, repeating that message from the Prime Minister that this could drag on for 6 months. And so any measures the government takes needs to be sustainable. On that note, Mr Morrison has issued a stern warning about panic buying, those extraordinary scenes we've seen in supermarkets across the country, which have left many vulnerable people without access to basic supplies. Mr Morrison says it has to stop.
Stop hoarding. I can't be more blunt about it. Stop it. It's not sensible. It's not helpful. And I've got to say, it's been one of the most disappointing things I've seen in Australian behaviour in response to this crisis. That is not who we are as a people.
The Prime Minister, Scott Morrison there. Now, the government has also announced a $715 million package to help the aviation industry as Australian airlines and airlines around the world come under extreme pressure. More economic measures are also on the way on top of that multi-billion-dollar stimulus package that was announced last week. Mr Morrison says those new measures will be announced as soon as possible, and the government is hoping to pass all of the measures when Parliament returns on a much smaller scale than usual next week.
The ABC's Jade McMillan there. It is 21 minutes after 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Do get in touch if you or a family member are caught up in this whole transit issue. That is people coming from China, Iran, a number of European countries, the United Kingdom and Ireland, who cannot transit through the US if they're flying, trying to get on Air New Zealand flights. They can't stop over in the US, and Air New Zealand says that people who are not US citizens will need to travel back to New Zealand via Asia or the Middle East. We would love to hear from you. Text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Immigration is promising a hardline approach to rounding up wayward tourists flouting isolation rules, and it's calling on you to dob those people in. 2 tourists are tonight in lockdown in Christchurch awaiting deportation after refusing to stay isolated for 14 days. Immigration's Stephen Vaughan says the rules are clear, and if you fall foul of them, they're coming to get you.
Well, essentially anybody that has come to New Zealand is required to self-isolate. Since Saturday, when the government announced that every person entering New Zealand from anywhere in the world would be required to self-isolate for 14 days, that's excluding the Pacific. So the vast majority of people have come in and they've absolutely complied and they are self-isolating. But for a handful of people, there are willful non-compliers who have refused to do so, and we're tracking them down and deporting them.
And are those, visitors to the country, obviously, if you're looking to deport them?
Absolutely. Foreign nationals who have come to New Zealand, aware of the requirements to self-isolate and willfully not complying.
What kind of numbers are you talking about here, Stephen?
Very, very small numbers, probably 5 or so people at the moment that we're actively pursuing. And when you compare it to the vast majority, the thousands of people who are actually complying the self-isolation notification, then it's a dramatically small number. However, significant, and this completely irresponsible behaviour will not be tolerated.
So when you say you're actively pursuing them, what does that mean?
Well, when people come into New Zealand, they fill out a arrival card, and we're aware of their details. We will contact them, we will visit them, we will get an explanation from them, and if they're not complying with the health requirements, they will be liable for deportation, they'll be quarantined for 14 days, and then they will leave New Zealand.
So, in terms of the ones that you are wanting to chase down now, are they wayward? Do you not know where they are at this point?
As we speak, we're making inquiries to locate, as I say, a handful, very small number of people. We've yet to get an explanation from them, but if they are willfully non-complying, then they will follow the same pathway as the people from yesterday morning from Southeast Asia who failed to comply with the requirements to self-isolate. They've been made liable for deportation. They are being quarantined at the moment. They are detained. And after the 14-day period, or 13 days now, if you accept that they've been in our custody since yesterday, they will leave New Zealand.
So a couple of things there, Stephen. Are these people you are onto because you've done spot checks, or how has it come to your attention that they maybe aren't playing by the rules?
Well, from a variety of sources. So the public have contacted us directly, or they have been on in the media saying they were willfully non-compliant, and we've identified who those people are. But as I say, the numbers are very, very small. But anybody who has any information in relation to a foreign national who may have come to New Zealand who is not complying, then we encourage them to contact us.
So in terms of the ones that are liable for deportation, you mentioned that they have to wait out their 14 days of isolation. Where are you keeping them?
Well, the places that they're detained are approved by the Ministry of Health as a facility in which they can stay and do their quarantine. And they're in different parts of the country that can be assigned or placed as a Ministry of Health facility. And once they've done the 14 days, then they get deported.
So are they under lock and key as such, or is someone keeping a constant eye on them?
Well, they are absolutely under lock and key and quarantine, and an eye is being kept on them to make sure that after the 14-day period, they leave New Zealand.
Are they in jails or are they in health facilities?
Health facilities that have been designated as quarantine facilities, and these can be assigned by the Ministry of Health in different parts of the country. The ones at the moment that were made liable for deportation from Southeast Asia are in isolation in Christchurch.
Okay, so is that a hospital, do you mean, when you say health facility?
Well, it's just a designated health facility that the Ministry of Health would designate a facility to be a quarantine facility for these very purposes. It is not a hospital and it is not a prison.
So, Stephen, are you using electronic bracelets at all, or is that an option?
That's probably a question for the Ministry of Health, actually, as opposed to us. We're not in this case. These people, as I say, are being quarantined in a health facility that's been designated as such, and we are monitoring them clearly to ensure that after 14 days they leave New Zealand.
So in terms of tracking these people down, who's helping you? Do the police play a role here? Are you working together?
It's a multi-agency operation with police, customs, Ministry of Health and Immigration New Zealand, where any information that is given to any of the agencies or we become aware of it, we will actively pursue people who we believe are willfully non-complying. And as I say, the same process will be meted out to them as was with the people from Southeast Asia yesterday.
What was their reaction when you tracked them down?
I wasn't actually part of the team that spoke to them. However, it was explained to them that they were in breach and that they were not complying with the Health Act. And even if you accepted, which we don't, that they didn't know that prior to coming to New Zealand, when entering New Zealand, it is absolutely clear of what your requirements are, and they didn't comply. And of course now, in 13 days' time, they'll be heading back to where they came from.
So are we picking up the bill for this, or do they have to pay for their 14 days accommodation?
Well, there's a cost recovery program with anyone that's deported from New Zealand. In most cases, people that are deported from New Zealand, they can't come back to New Zealand within a 5-year period, but if they do, they have to pay for the cost of their deportation.
So these cards that passengers are now filling out when they arrive, these are obviously critical to your operation.
That's correct, yes. They're on arrival, passengers are filling out arrival cards into New Zealand. They fill out the health cards. There's also a telephone follow-up. And the Ministry of Health is also in the process of establishing the spot checks alongside the multi-agency approach I've just described.
So do you play any role in monitoring New Zealand citizens?
Immigration New Zealand is responsible as the authoritative source of all foreign nationals in New Zealand. So we are focused on foreign nationals who come to New Zealand and cross our border, as opposed to New Zealand citizens.
So of a day, how many people would you be checking up on?
Well, any person that crosses the border clearly is met by a border officer. And then the people who we believe are in breach, of which there are a very small number of foreign nationals, 5 or less, We are actively attempting to identify those people. We have 2 people in custody, as you're aware of, who will be deported in 13 days' time. And any other information that we get, we'll certainly be acting on.
So, what would you say to people out there listening to this when they think, oh, I've watched that backpacker wandering around the neighbourhood or going down to the shops, and I know they should be in lockdown? What do you say to people observing that kind of behaviour?
Well, they have watched that sort of behaviour. We have watched that sort of behaviour. We know who those people are, and we're actively pursuing them. They will be detained. They will be quarantined, and in 14 days, they will go back to where they'd come from.
So do you want people to call you if they see things that they think just aren't right?
Absolutely. This is totally irresponsible behaviour. I would be amazed if anyone coming into New Zealand wouldn't know about our quarantine facilities and the compliance with the Health Act. And even if they did arrive not knowing, going through the border, they're absolutely aware of it. So it's, for me, completely irresponsible. We're not tolerating it. We've got a zero tolerance around it. We're going in very hard and very early to ensure that the safety of people in New Zealand are protected.
Yeah, so you're taking it really seriously.
Absolutely. It's completely irresponsible, and as I say, we will not tolerate it.
And that is Immigration New Zealand's Stephen Vaughan. Coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, 150 people in Dunedin, including students, are being tested for COVID-19 after a teenager at Logan Park High School is confirmed with coronavirus. International traveller numbers are down almost 50% at Auckland Airport, and world leaders pledge billions of dollars to counter the fallout from coronavirus. We'd love to hear from you about anything you've heard on the program this evening, especially if you're a traveller trying to get home or you have a family member who is struggling to get home at the moment. We're interested to know how hard it is, especially now it seems we cannot transit through America. You can text us on 2101, you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ and email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Time for the headlines now with Susanna.
The number of coronavirus cases has almost doubled to 20, but health officials don't yet know how many hundreds of other people could have been exposed. The Ministry of Health today announced a further 8 cases, which are now spread through most main centres. The Director General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield, says the spike is due to travellers coming home as countries lock down their borders and impose travel bans. Dr Bloomfield says the risk of a community outbreak is still low. Foreign Affairs Minister Winston Peters says at least 80,000 New Zealanders are overseas and not all of them will get home before flights grind to a halt. About 70,000 people are registered with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade, and Mr Peters says about another 10,000 have made contact to lodge their whereabouts. Mr Peters says there's a narrow window to get home as the COVID-19 pandemic worsens. Police officers have made spot checks on more than 40 tourists to check if they're self-isolating under the COVID-19 rules that came in on Monday. They visited 41 people from a randomly sampled group of travellers yesterday and say most are taking isolation seriously. However, at least 3 tourists who failed to self-isolate have been taken into custody. A police officer accused of raping his colleague in Northland has been found guilty. The 29-year-old man has been on trial in the Auckland District Court this month, accused of groping his colleague and later raping her in a Kerikeri motel as she slept. The man, whose identity remained secret on appeal, covered his face in shock on hearing the result. He will be sentenced in April. The Green Party has failed in its attempt to reverse a blunder which resulted in safe zones near clinics being dumped from abortion legislation. The proposed law, which removes abortion from the Crimes Act, is going through its third and final reading this afternoon. The bill originally allowed safe zones of 150 metres to be set up around abortion clinics to stop protesters from harassing people coming and going, but that provision was axed last week in a voting mix-up. Those are the latest news headlines from RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna, and thanks for joining us. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. It's time now for business with Nona Peltier, who joins us in the studio. Hi, Nona. Fonterra reported its half-year results today, so how are they looking?
Actually, quite good. They had a good result. Strong first half, $501 million. That was comparing with a $72 million net profit the year earlier. So that's a big improvement. And their revenue was also up 7%. So that's a good result for their first half. That really didn't show much of the impact of the COVID-19 virus on their business in China. So I spoke with their chief executive. He said that the first couple months of this financial year, so February and now part of March, showed that there had been some impact, but things are definitely improving there in terms of the movement of products and so on. He said health products and food products have been quicker to move, so that's a good sign for Fonterra. And they're maintaining their season, their farm gate milk price for this season. And their expectation is that they're going to be able to deliver on their earlier guidance. So from the point of view of Fonterra, pretty good result. They laid off 200 people in the first half of this year as they restructured, because as we know, recent history, terrible results. But he said that that's it for now. There's not going to be any more restructuring. They're in a position now where they see themselves going forward. They're looking to sell their China Farms business in China, as well as a business that they have a stake in Brazil. And they wrote down the value of those assets quite substantially. And so they're looking to pay down their debt. They've paid down quite a lot of it already. They're committed to paying down even more. So pretty good result. And certainly that was reflected in the result. The result in the share price rose 4.4% today. That was where it ended. So that's a pretty good result for Fonterra.
Okay, so a bunch of other companies have updated the market today. What are we hearing from them? Okay.
It's a bit of a sigh. Yeah, look, was the updates that we received were not necessarily all bad, but the ones that we got that weren't good were really poor. Like Sky City basically said that they were removing any idea of a guidance, that they're expecting that if the domestic tourism, domestic foot traffic keeps up, they're going to be all right, because I think you spoke with them yesterday, and they said they were reorganizing their casino so that there would be,
social distancing is what we call it,
social distancing, that's what we're calling it. Yes, that's right.
Pokie machines.
So they thought that they might be okay, but they're certainly not overly confident about that. And interestingly, declined to comment, to talk to us, to provide an interview to answer any questions.
Right, but they're chucking out their guidance. Okay.
But they're not the only ones. Kathmandu, also the same story. They've dumped their guidance. They're saying no. Their foot traffic is also down. And that's both in New Zealand and in Australia.
Well, that's interesting too, because that's a company associated with trips and tourism. It's the gear when you want to hike up a mountain and you go off and do the trip of a lifetime. And obviously, people aren't.
Heartland Bank, it's expecting their lending will remain strong, and they're quite comfortable with where they're at. One of the ones that was really interesting today was Sky Television. We've been watching them for a while. They're definitely reviewing their position. They've also said that their guidance is off the table, and they're now looking at what they can do in terms of exercising their rights that they hold for their broadcasting rights.
Yeah, because the context here, Nona, is there is hardly any sport that is able to be broadcast in so many competitions.
Right.
Are gone. NBA off for the season, next level down.
Yeah,
gone as well, college basketball.
It was interesting the way that they worded their report to the market, and again, declined to be interviewed. So they basically said that they are working to recover some costs associated with sports content rights.
So they want refunds from people, maybe.
That force majeure that we talked about this morning in our business program. So who knows what's going to happen with that. In the meantime, though, they say that they're going through their extensive library of sport content, and who knows, we may be watching reruns of our greatest moments. I don't know exactly.
In sporting history.
Those moments.
Okay, well, there might be a lot of bored people at home that need something to watch.
Look, that's just some of the highlights, but look, it's not an extensive list of all the things that we heard today. It was wide spread updates from all sectors of the economy, as you might expect. And look, a lot of companies are doing it tough, and as the Minister of Finance said, some might, just go to the wall, no matter how much support they get.
So how did we finish up on the markets?
We started out really strongly. We were picking up where Wall Street left off, and we rose to about 6% today. It looked really good.
Yep.
And then Australia opened, and things all went south after that, and we ended up just 0.2%, just 20 points to 9,455. When I looked around 5 o'clock, Australia was down 6.6%. And Australia's doing it really tough. And they dragged the Kiwi down with it this morning. Overnight, I was just looking at some of these numbers. The Australian dollar hit a 17-year low of 59.58 against the U.S. That's 59 cents U.S., right? And so that dragged the Kiwi down with it. We fell, I think, to, what do we go to? 59.19, and we're right at the moment we're at 59.60. So, and I don't know what to say about that, but exporters certainly will be happy because that helps their
bottom lines.
Yes,
yeah.
And because we know that China is opening up again, that's good news. If there is a bit of good news in the market today, that might be it.
And don't forget our little friends, the pound. What have you got for us there?
Oh, yeah. Okay. Hey, wait. 99 Australian is where we're at. Okay. We're not at the parity party yet, but, 49.1 British pence. And, those were the numbers today.
Thanks, Nona. Nona Peltier with another busy day in business. The Health Ministry says New Zealand is now effectively at war with COVID-19, and one of the lines of defence is an early launch of this year's flu vaccination campaign. While it won't protect against COVID-19, it will help ease pressure on the health system over winter. It comes as the government launches a public health campaign with a wartime ring to it, Unite Against COVID-19. But it seems some on the front line are still waiting for their ammunition, with one medical centre telling patients they won't have the flu vaccines until next month. Political reporter Yvette McCullough has the story.
Health Minister David Clark says Unite Against COVID-19 is a call to action in the war of us versus the coronavirus.
We need to be, as a country, everybody doing their bit. Everybody can do something in this battle against COVID-19. That is as simple as washing your hands regularly. It's as simple as not going out when you're unwell. But it's also about, giving your elderly neighbours a phone call, checking on how they're doing.
Another weapon in the arsenal, ensuring the most vulnerable get vaccinated against the flu. The government's vaccine campaign is starting 2 weeks early, and it will be bigger than ever, with 400,000 more vaccines than last year. Vaccinations are free for at-risk groups, including anyone 65 and over, pregnant women, people with certain chronic conditions, and young children with a history of severe respiratory illness. Healthcare workers also get a free jab.
The flu causes significant strain on our health system, and vaccinating yourself against preventable illness like the flu will ensure hospitals will be used by people who need them most.
Over 65 John Atkinson tried to book in to get a vaccination with Ropata Health in Lower Hutt yesterday. He was told they wouldn't have any vaccines until April. His brother, also over 65, tried to book today and was told the same thing.
With the thing that's going on, you might have to wait 2 weeks for an appointment anyway, so I'm just thought I'd get in early if it was available.
Mr Atkinson gets the flu vaccine every year and is mindful of not putting extra pressure on the health system at this time.
I'd just be good to clarify it rather than broadcasting it to the nation, that you can get it from today, when apparently you can't in some cases.
Ropata practice manager Adrian Tucker says they only found out yesterday the government was bringing forward the vaccine campaign. He says the vaccines are due to arrive on Friday and they can't book appointments until they physically have them.
If we set up a flu clinic today, we could put 200 patients through those. But if the vaccines don't turn up on Friday, we've then got to ring and disappoint all those people. So it's just the workload as well, especially at this busy time.
He says their phones have been ringing off the hook today following the government's announcement.
It would be nice to have known earlier, but I don't suppose they've made their decision earlier. So, they can only tell us when they've made their decision, really, and we have to react as best we possibly can.
Health Minister David Clark says more than 200,000 vaccines have already been distributed across the country, and the rest are on their way.
For those people who are experiencing a little delay, please be aware and be patient.
While Mr Clark could give assurances the most vulnerable are being prioritised, no reassurances there'll be enough vaccines for everyone.
Pharmac are the experts at projecting forward what we need. As soon as COVID-19 broke, New Zealand ordered more vaccine. We got ahead, and so that's why we have 30% more vaccine than our record year last year.
Nationals Health spokesperson Michael Woodhouse doubts there will be enough.
No, I don't think it will be enough, and I don't think even the government does. In the second stage of the package that was announced yesterday, there's funding still available for flu vaccines. I think they should act now and get as many as they can in. Much better to have more than we need than not enough.
Pharmac is still looking to see whether it can source more, but not surprisingly, global demand is huge. The vaccine will be available for the general population from April 13th. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Yvette McCullough.
Parliament is becoming increasingly fractious as the government prepares the country for a major economic shock. A $12 billion support package was its first urgent response to the COVID-19 crisis unfolding around the world. No one is willing to say exactly how many jobs will be lost in the coming months, with ministers saying there's no way to know except that it will be significant. The opposition is highly critical of the support package, saying the government is spending money on beneficiaries when businesses face shedding hundreds of thousands of jobs or going under altogether. Our political editor Jane Patterson filed this report.
Mr Speaker, I want to say this again very seriously to the member on the other side of the House. This is a time where New Zealanders need to know, that this House is united, Mr Speaker. We are politicians.
The COVID-19 crisis continues to dominate the attention of political leaders and their exchanges across the House. The Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern has put out the rallying call for New Zealanders to come together to fight a common enemy, accompanied by the sizable support package. The opposition continues to apply pressure over the government's response, with testing a major focus. Nationals leader Simon Bridges argues the low level of testing is hiding the true rate of community infection, prompting this from Ms Ardern.
If you would like to receive a briefing on this, I am happy to provide it, but the member is becoming borderline irresponsible.
In light of that last answer, what does she say to the half a dozen doctors who've contacted me by email and other means in the last 24 hours to express their frustration?
And the exchanges became increasingly personal.
My final plea is to the member to think about the audience he is speaking to right now. This doesn't have to be political.
Does she accept that it is my constitutional duty to ask her questions and try and get answers on the most significant issue this country has faced in many, many years?
Mr Speaker, I have been in that seat and I know the difference between responsible and political.
A major criticism from National is that with a $150,000 cap, the support package leaves many larger companies high and dry. The Employment Minister Willie Jackson was asked whether ministers had been given any number for estimated job losses.
There is significant uncertainty about how this will play out, and any forecasts are likely to be inaccurate.
National's finance spokesperson Paul Goldsmith asked the Minister Grant Robertson a series of questions about how many jobs would be covered by the package.
What I'm trying to work out is, does he think that roughly 700,000 jobs out of roughly 900,000 eligible jobs will need to be subsidised?
Mr Speaker, as I say, I'm not spending my time doing the kind of calculations the member wants. I'm spending my time making sure that businesses can access a scheme in real time, and they are.
Jacinda Ardern told Parliament very large and complex companies would be dealt with on a case-by-case basis. Air New Zealand is an obvious one, and urgent talks with the government are already underway. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Jane Patterson.
Community sports teams say they've been hit hard by the cancellation of games by the country's sporting bodies in a bid to contain the spread of COVID-19. Today, Football New Zealand, Cricket New Zealand and Rugby League New Zealand announced their seasons are off until May. It follows the same moves by their netball and rugby counterparts yesterday. Mackenzie Smith reports.
As fears over community transmissions of COVID-19 grow, sport is mostly off the cards. Yesterday's news that Rugby New Zealand was postponing club and community games for a month was just the beginning. Community football, cricket, netball and rugby league are cancelled until May the 2nd. Rugby New Zealand Chief Executive Mark Robinson says it's no longer safe to run the sport at club or community level.
Super teams are in very closed environments. They are getting tested and monitored every day. That's very different to a community game where we have no ability to do that. We have very fluid situations of young people involved in the game in a wide range of different communities, all interacting with each other. So our ability to control that environment just simply doesn't exist.
The manager of Auckland rugby team Bay Roskill Vikings, Rob Vogel, says it's a big blow.
Leave a huge gap. Obviously, a big part of people's lives is sport. And especially the kids out being active and things like that. So it's going to have quite a big effect moving forward, because at the moment we don't know what the landscape looks like.
The netball suspensions came as a surprise to Netball North Harbour Chief Executive Lynette Brady.
We're blindsided yesterday with the announcement. We were sort of working on and planning on the Ministry of Health guidance, which was for events or gatherings under 500 to continue. So we were sort of planning on that, and then to be blindsided at 2 o'clock with the announcement that all netball postponed until the 2nd of May obviously changed the goalposts dramatically.
She says the Auckland organisation will keep its doors open for any members of the public wanting to play.
I think it's really important from a health and wellbeing perspective is that the physical activities, is hugely important in keeping them mentally and physically fit. So if they're physically fit, they're more resilient for the bugs and things. And so I think there is still some need for some physical activities.
Meanwhile, Athletics New Zealand says its events don't have membership of more than 500 and there will be no changes. However, its Chief Executive Pete Fitzinger says they've sent out Ministry of Health guidelines to their 171 clubs.
One thing that we are emphasising is to record everyone who does go. So let's say you have a club night and there's 100 people. Well, it's important now to record who was there. So then if someone comes down with coronavirus later, you can notify everyone.
Other cancellations include New Zealand Football's 2020 Secondary Schools Futsal Championships set for late March and New Zealand Cricket's Domestic Plunket Shield season. Rugby New Zealand's Mark Robinson says they're pushing ahead with a planned domestic competition to replace the suspended Super Rugby tournament. This would involve 5 teams playing at empty stadiums, and it could be up and running in a fortnight. For Checkpoint, Mackenzie Smith.
It is 8 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Let us know your thoughts on anything you've heard on the programme this evening. Are you missing sport already? What are you doing instead? What are the kids up to if they can't go to their sports events and games? You can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. We would love to hear from you. Families of people with disabilities lobbying the Prime Minister on the abortion bill have found an ally in Labour MP Greg O'Connor. The Ohariu MP and former police officer has an intellectually disabled son and says he's concerned about what will happen with post-20-week pregnancies under the proposed law. It comes as abortion advocates reel from a mix-up in Parliament that saw proposed safe zones around abortion clinics voted down. The bill is going through its third and final reading this evening. Alex Perrottet reports.
Labour MP Greg O'Connor says women should only have access to abortion after 20 weeks if there's a risk to her life, a risk of serious harm to her physical or mental health, or if the fetus is so medically impaired it's unlikely to survive beyond birth. But his supplementary order paper to that effect was voted down 45 votes to 73. Mr O'Connor says he's pro-choice, but believes women can be pressured to abort when they discover their unborn child has a disability. He thinks the current bill could lead to more of that.
Why I find it difficult to vote for the whole bill at the moment is that there is not sufficient criteria post-20 week to ensure that pressure will not come under or on those with disabled children.
Helen Morton-Jones is mother to Gabriel, an 11-year-old with Down's syndrome. She's part of a new group called Downright Discrimination, concerned there's not enough protections for women faced with a tough decision.
It'll happen under coercion of men who don't want to have a child with a disability. It happens all the time. Men are always coercing women into having abortions, and at the moment that law protects women. So I don't really think Andrew Little is thinking it through clearly. I think that there are abortions happening after the 20 weeks with the specialists, but it doesn't mean that it should be made law.
Greg O'Connor says his proposal is a good compromise.
Where we do have sufficient criteria applied to a post-20-week or post-viability particular abortions, which will at least give some comfort to people on both sides of the discussion.
The MP in charge of the bill, Andrew Little, told Parliament Greg O'Connor's proposal would return New Zealand to the status quo, where women have to lie about their mental health.
The whole intention was to move away from that, even at the post-20-week level. Even where women are not required to lie. Let's remember that at that point, the decision is about a wanted pregnancy, and the woman has been thrown into a health crisis that calls on her to confront a decision about abortion.
Helen Morton-Jones says the new law will lead to the expectation that women will have an abortion, and New Zealand could end up like other countries that have almost entirely eliminated Down's syndrome through terminations. She's one of more than 1,300 people who have signed a new petition asking the government to reconsider. She says Jacinda Ardern promised to protect babies with disabilities when she pledged not to change the time periods already set out in law.
Incredibly disappointed in Jacinda Ardern. She is not, the politician she said she was going to be. She's broken her promises to us. You have to wonder really what her big picture is for New Zealand people with disabilities. Where's she going with all this?
In a confused vote in Parliament last week, David Seymour's amendment to remove a ban on protesters from abortion clinics was supported, meaning they will not be forced to stand 150 metres away. Jackie Edmund is the Chief Executive of New Zealand Family Planning and says she hasn't seen any recent bad behaviour outside clinics, but she is disturbed by people protesting outside Parliament, holding up graphic signs. She says even the presence of protesters can be intimidating for a young woman.
It's pretty difficult to go into a health service and see someone protesting outside if you're somebody going to talk about an abortion. So they're not necessarily harassing individuals or individual women going in, but they're certainly, it's intimidating to see that sort of protesting outside a clinic.
Michelle Kaufman organises the 40 Days of Action group, which holds prayer sessions outside abortion clinics in Auckland, and says every member must sign statements of peace and abide by the law.
To know that there's somebody else there that are willing to help her in her time of need, because a lot of women don't actually, necessarily think that this is the best solution, but they feel like they have no other choice. And so we offer a lot of practical help and support.
She says she very rarely talks to women who pass by and does so only when they approach her asking for help. She says she provides yet another safety net for some women who would rather have their baby but haven't yet been given any support to do so. The bill must pass a third reading vote in Parliament before becoming law. For Checkpoint, Alex Perrottet.
Now something a little lighter, as governments increasingly ask people to stay home to stop the virus spreading. Theatre shows, music festivals and sporting events have been cancelled around the world. But some of the biggest pop stars, like Chris Martin from the British band Coldplay, are still finding a way to perform for their fans, streaming live via social media.
I was supposed to be with the band Coldplay today. We're stuck in different countries, so I'm here at your service. Trouble. Okay. Viva la vida. Gosh, they're coming in now, thick and fast. I feel like the right thing to be doing is to be staying at home and not buying too much toilet paper.
And the BBC's Jimmy Blake says there are other gigs which seem to be going online.
We've spoken to someone called Elle Devine as well, also from the UK, who, when her tour got cancelled, she said, right, well, that's this is the thing I'm going to do is go on tour across social media. So she's playing on a different social media platform in the coming weeks. There's a guy called Youngblood who's from north of London who did a whole chat show on YouTube yesterday for an hour. He says he's going to do more of that. Christine and the Queens is in isolation in France at the moment. She's been doing shows every evening on her Instagram page. That gig Chris Martin did last night, that's now been passed on to John Legend to do that. There's also loads of artists like Tom Grennan, another UK-based act, who has just kind of put messages on social media saying, look, I'm not at work, but I am still healthy, so I can help out in my local community as well.
And that's the BBC's Jimmy Blake. A lot of you getting in touch about trials and tribulations travelling. This person says, I run a campground in Tākaka and I'm seeing people that are trying to get into my camp that are supposed to self-isolate but can't because they live out of a tent. Someone else says their son's hurrying home from Khyber Pass. He got out of Iran the day they closed the borders. Singapore and Malaysia and Qatar have closed their borders, so there's no way of getting out, only Dubai left.
RNZ News at 6. Good evening, I'm Susana Leatawa. Dunedin residents are bracing for more positive COVID-19 cases after 150 close contacts of 2 local cases are tested. A man and his teenage son who attends a Dunedin school are the first virus cases in the city. Logan Park High School has been cleaned but will be closed until next Tuesday. Test results of people who had contact with the pair are due on Friday. A Dunedin man, Craig, has told Checkpoint he's worried about his partner who has respiratory problems.
I was okay up until today, but now that there's 2 confirmed cases, there could be more, so it's pretty scary. Even I'm not really comfortable coming to work, but I have to pay the bills and to feed the kids, so it's got to be done, I guess.
Dunedin painter Craig. The number of coronavirus cases has almost doubled to 20 today. Immigration New Zealand is promising a hardline approach to rounding up tourists who flout self-isolation rules. 2 tourists are tonight in lockdown in Christchurch awaiting deportation after refusing to stay isolated for 14 days. An immigration spokesperson, Stephen Vaughan, has told Checkpoint if people fall foul of the rules, the authorities will come knocking.
The vast majority of people have come in and they've absolutely complied and they are self-isolating, but for a handful of people, there are willful non-compliers who have refused to do so, and we're tracking them down and deporting them.
Stephen Vaughan. Police yesterday made spot checks on more than 40 tourists. Supermarkets are struggling to keep up with customer demand for online shopping and in some cases are cancelling orders. Foodstuffs, which owns New World, Pack and Save and Foursquare, says some stores don't have the capacity to fill all grocery lists. Spokesperson Antoinette Laird is asking customers to bear with staff while they get new systems in place. Supermarkets may restrict the amount of a product purchased if it's in short supply. Ms Laird urges customers to continue shopping as usual. A New Zealander returning from Australia because of COVID-19 says she's struggling to find a suitable place to self-isolate for 14 days. Holly Gervin-Russell is set to fly home on Monday after she quit her job and booked flights late last week. The government has since urged all New Zealanders travelling overseas to return. Ms Gervin-Russell says she'll be looking for work when she arrives, but her biggest concern is finding a safe place to go into quarantine.
I'm just sending out lots of messages to see if anyone's got a batch or an empty house that I can go and isolate in, because I can't go and live with my parents because my grandparents spend a lot of time there and I don't want to be around them if I've got a risk of having the virus. And then my flat that my partner lives in that I would go to has 3 people living there, so it's going to be a bit hard to self-isolate there.
Holly Gervin-Russell. The police have revealed they investigated 4 officers for their behaviour during the Waitangi Day celebrations in which a policewoman was raped by a colleague. A police officer was today found guilty in the Auckland District Court of indecent assault and sexual violation. In a statement, the police say they investigated the behaviour of off-duty officers from outside Northland who were in Kerikeri for Waitangi Day last year. Superintendent Naila Hassan says their behaviour was unacceptable. 3 staff were disciplined and remain in the force. A 4th is no longer working for the police. The ANZ Bank has cut its fixed home loan interest rates. Its one-year fixed rate has dropped to just over 3% and the two-year rate has come down by 30 basis points to 3.5%. In contrast, its variable home loan lending and commercial rates dropped 75 basis points, which was the full amount of the Reserve Bank's cut to the official cash rate announced on Monday. The fixed rates are the lowest ever offered by the bank. All term deposit rates, excluding 30 days, have been cut by 0.25%. It's coming up to 4.5 minutes past 6. New Zealand Rugby is proposing a domestic competition involving the country's 5 Super Rugby teams to be played at empty stadiums as an alternative to the Super Rugby competition, which is on hold due to the coronavirus. However, the union chief executive Mark Robinson refuses to say what kind of financial impacts a cancelled Super Rugby season will have on player wages, but he concedes it's an issue NZR will have to face.
That's a question that is for the future, essentially. On that, we haven't had any detailed conversations with the players. I'd just stress that they've been fantastic so far in terms of how proactive they've been in terms of seeking solutions through all this, and we'll continue to work with them. That's not something that we're focused on right now.
Mark Robinson of New Zealand Rugby. Australian Supercars has postponed its next 3 events, including Auckland, in response to the coronavirus pandemic. The next round is now scheduled to be at Pointen on June 6th, but the organisation is adamant they can still fit in all 14 championship rounds this year. The Auckland round was scheduled for Hampton Downs in late April. New Zealander Scott McLaughlin's IndyCar racing debut at Indianapolis Motor Speedway in May is also up in the air. IndyCar has cancelled or postponed the first 4 races of the 2020 season, with the Indianapolis race likely to run as the season opener. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, it's possibly not the first thing on people's minds right now, but linguist Cynthia White has been thinking about how we welcome new migrants into our communities. We've got another episode of our radio adaptation of The Vintner's Luck by Elizabeth Knox, and we are joined by the author herself, who will put in a good word for imagination and why we need it now more than ever. On Nights of me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland to North Taranaki, including Coromandel Peninsula, Bay of Plenty, Taumaranui and Taupo. Mainly fine today, occasional showers spreading north tomorrow. South Taranaki to Kapiti Coast, including Taihape. Cloud increasing from tonight, isolated showers retreating to the Tararua Ranges in the morning. Showers spreading through Horowhenua and Kapiti tomorrow evening. Gisborne to Wairarapa and Wellington, partly cloudy. A few showers in Hawke's Bay and Gisborne, and 1 or 2 for northern Wellington overnight, becoming fine everywhere by morning. Nelson, Marlborough, Canterbury and North Otago mainly fine, high cloud at times tomorrow. The rest of Otago and Southland mostly fine weather today, with evening showers about Stewart Island. Showers spreading north tomorrow. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland cloudy periods and isolated showers. Rain for Fiordland from the evening, spreading north tomorrow. Chatham Islands cloudy periods, chance of a light shower. RNZ National, it's 7 minutes past 6.
Thanks, Susanna. If you're just joining us, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. What happens when your whole business relies on planes landing and taking off and suddenly that traffic turns to a trickle? International traveller numbers have plunged for Auckland Airport, and on top of that, it's made the tough decision today to send the Blue Coat volunteers home. Fresh numbers show a 44% drop in international travellers on the same time last year, and flight schedules continue to change by the hour. The government's now advising all New Zealanders overseas to consider returning home while commercial options are still available. Auckland Airport's cancelled its interim dividend and its directors are taking a 20% pay cut, as is CEO Adrian Littlewood. He says the airport's having to look critically at its future development plans.
There's probably around 800 businesses and 20,000 people who come to work in this area every day. And in some ways, their activities are all connected. So at times like this, there's no question that the impact of those travel restrictions ripples right throughout this part of the city and also throughout the country.
So how badly? I mean, what does it look like out there at the moment?
Well, it's pretty dramatic, I think, in terms of the changes that we're seeing, and you can see that through the announcements the airlines are making at the moment. So obviously New Zealand announcing it's pulling back its international service by about 85%, as well as sort of similar changes on domestic. And that's a story you're seeing repeated around the world, in fact. So, while we're focusing on New Zealand, this is happening in almost every major country around the world. So that naturally affects travel in and out of our country, and even, I think, people's desire to travel and be able to plan for the future. So while we're very focused on the immediate moment we're in right now, I think also if we look ahead, people make their plans around booking quite a long way out. So I do think we've got to be prepared that, this will impact, our business and New Zealand's tourism industry for some while yet as, we get out of the other side of this and through into recovery mode.
So what are you thinking? In your head, are you thinking end of year, end of next year, end of the year after that?
Look, I think it's just way too early to tell. I mean, at the moment, we're receiving new information almost hourly. And so I think we've got to be flexible to understand that, react to that, see how that flows through to the various businesses around here. And look, I can say that, the industry is pulling together incredibly well. Had very many conversations with the different CEOs of the border agencies, the aviation community, tourism, just sharing what we know and trying to figure out how each of us is reacting, because really, at these kind of moments, we're all in this together.
Given that your business model is based on planes taking off and landing, that's how you get paid. What happens when that stops in terms of your revenue?
Well, you're absolutely right. So unlike airlines and others in the tourism industry who take pre-bookings and have that cash flow to hand, we're really a pay-as-you-go model. And so that does naturally straight away flow through to our business. So that's something we really haven't had to face into before. So we are quickly moving to try and understand what that means for us, for our partners and others that we work with on a daily basis. And again, as I said right at the top, that affects many different businesses, many who aren't directly connected to us, but are indirectly connected through their other relationships with those in the tourism and travel industry.
And I know it's early days in terms of having solid numbers, but can you give me a bit of an idea? How many airlines would you normally have coming and going? Can you give me an idea of how many plane movements would be normal, and how does that compare to what you're staring down the barrel of now?
Yeah, well, typically in any given day, we'd probably have about 500 flight movements a day. And that's split, in terms of passenger volumes, about half and half international and domestic. So there's no question it's dropping quite significantly. I think last week we said for the early part of March we'd seen international fall away about almost 20%, and we saw that continue. We are seeing that continue through. But frankly, at the moment, the announcements and the reschedules are coming almost hourly. So even right now, I can't say for certain what we're seeing today or what that looks like for tomorrow, because I think we need to digest that information as it comes through.
You're an essential service, but I mean, the reality is, how viable are you right now?
Well, look, we're a resilient business. We've got a strong foundation to our position here, and I think look longer term. If you stand back and say, the place of aviation in the heart of New Zealand is whether it's for travel overseas or getting around the country, I think remains. Nothing changes there. We're just facing a sort of an unprecedented sort of period of change and disruption. But look, we'll get through this, and I think we will get through as New Zealanders working together across the different organisations. But it's certainly pretty unusual times for us all right now.
The government today has essentially, put the call out to Kiwis and said, come home now. So what are you gearing up for in terms of that?
Look, we'll have to wait and see. Certainly there has been a sense of people coming home and wanting to, return from their trips early. We may see actually, passengers sort of spike a little bit the next few days as people look to come home. I think that will depend on whether they're able to get home, whether they want to return home and cut short their trips. But either way, obviously those people returning home will have to self-isolate too. So we're making sure we work with health to make sure that information is provided to arriving passengers, and that process is working well.
And that's Auckland Airport CEO Adrian Littlewood. A mass flu vaccination program will get underway early this year ahead of the coming flu season. The government is concerned the health system might not be able to cope with the added burden of COVID-19. So the government is promising 400,000 more vaccines will be made available for certain groups, including people over 65, pregnant women, people with certain chronic conditions and young children with a severe respiratory illness. Healthcare workers will also be given a free vaccine. But questions remain as to whether there will be enough for everyone else. Associate Health Minister Julianne Genter spoke to our reporter Logan Church in Wellington.
The government has announced today that it's bringing forward the flu vaccination campaign, and the really important message is that for the next 4 weeks we want to prioritise the people who are most vulnerable to being really sick and hospitalised by the flu and our frontline health workers. We have a record number of flu vaccines this year. We have ordered an additional 30% on last year, which was already a record number.
And what is that number? I think it's 400,000, is that correct?
We have an additional 400,000 vaccines this year, so that brings it to 1.768 million.
Okay, so when were they ordered?
The main order for the flu vaccine happens in October, and so we had ordered an additional 100,000 in October, but as soon as the COVID-19 situation became available, Pharmac quickly snapped up 300,000 more, and they're still looking.
Are they here now?
My understanding is there's quite a few that are already here. I don't know if the full order is here, but hundreds of thousands have already been distributed across the country as of yesterday.
Okay, so how many were actually administered in the last flu season?
In the last flu season, I know that we had about 1.2 million, but I couldn't tell you if all of them were administered.
Okay, so then who takes priority this flu season then?
Well, the funding eligibility is the same as it has been for previous seasons, and in the next 4 weeks we really want to push out and target those funded populations. They are the most at risk of being severely sick or being hospitalized with the flu. We want to reduce flu hospitalizations and incidents so that our health system can cope with COVID-19. The people who are funded are those over the age of 65 and people under the age of 65 who have heart disease, diabetes, cancer if it's not contraindicated, autoimmune disease, HIV, cochlear implants, Down syndrome, and if you're being treated with preventative therapy for asthma, pregnant people as well.
How many people are in that age group? Do you have some numbers on that?
The vulnerable people is about 1 million New Zealanders who are funded to receive this, and frontline health workers are an additional 200,000.
Okay, so that's 1.2 million, yet only 400,000 more vaccines?
Well, those people haven't all been vaccinated in previous years. Of course, we would have a target of 100% take-up, but last year it was about a quarter of pregnant women received it and about 62% of people over the age of 65.
So are you confident there is enough now in the country then?
I am confident that we have a record number of flu vaccines, and we are doing everything we can to ensure that the people most vulnerable to the flu are going to get that vaccine in the next 4 weeks.
So what happens to people not in that age, in those age brackets and those vulnerable groups that you mentioned before, say 30 to 50-year-olds who are perfectly healthy? Are they back in the queue?
We're asking people like myself who are not in that target group to wait until after the 13th of April to get your flu vaccine. This is still well ahead of when the flu season usually starts in New Zealand, which is in June, July.
So what happens if we need more? You said before you're confident there was a record number of vaccines in the country, but you wouldn't say if you're confident there was enough. So what happens if we need more?
Well, we do have 30% more than we had last year, and that's more than we've had in previous years. So I do expect demand for vaccines to increase. People are particularly health conscious right now, and Pharmac is currently doing everything they can to source additional flu vaccine if it's needed.
And that's the Associate Health Minister, Julianne Genter. Now to Dunedin, where 150 people will be tested for COVID-19 following tracing at a local high school. A man and his teenage son, who attends Logan Park High School, are the first 2 confirmed cases in the southern city. On the streets of Dunedin, people told our reporter Tess Brunton they're worried what the news means for more vulnerable people in their community.
North Dunedin dairy owner Em has a 4-month-old baby and says she may need to make drastic decisions if more cases are confirmed.
I do worry about the baby's health a lot. I thought about that if the virus getting worse and worse, I have to shut the shop to guarantee my baby's safety.
She lives above the dairy and relies on it to pay her rent. If it closes and tax time bites, Em says she will struggle. She wants to wear a protective mask, but says people might get the wrong idea.
I'm worried if I wear a mask, it would give other people the wrong message. They might thought I'm sick and they would not come to the shop again. But I think wearing masks is just a way to protect ourselves and other people. I hope the government can do more advertisement like that to suggest healthy people to wear masks in a public place.
So far, Em says her dairy hasn't been hit by panic buying as she mainly serves students, but she isn't ruling it out. Dunedin painter Craig says the impacts of COVID-19 are already hitting his family.
I go to work and then I come home and then I go out and do bills, shopping, pretty much everything that my partner can't do because she's got lung respiratory dysfunction. So if she goes out, pretty much she'll get very ill and they probably can't do nothing for her, so she'll probably, if it is bad, she'll have to, I don't know what she'll do, probably end up not here.
He says the reality of having 2 confirmed coronavirus cases is a bit too close to home.
I was okay up until today, but now that there's 2 confirmed cases, there could be more, so it's pretty scary. Even, I'm not really comfortable coming to work, but I have to pay the bills and to feed the kids, so it's got to be done, I guess.
Logan Park High School is not only one of the first Dunedin COVID-19 cases, it's also the first positive case in a school. The Ministry of Health says the 150 close contacts of the Dunedin family are in self-isolation awaiting testing. There's about 700 students on the school's roll. Director General of Health Ashley Bloomfield says the test results will be available on Friday.
All those close contacts will still be required to self-isolate for 14 days because it may be that one or more of the students could be incubating the virus and we will be watching them for the development of symptoms.
The Secretary for Education, Iona Holstead, says the affected students will be able to continue learning, just not from a classroom.
We know that the school has got facilities available for online learning, so if any young people are required to self-isolate because they have been in close contact with the student, then we know that they can provide online learning for that 14 days. So that's great. That's what we would have expected the school to plan for.
The high school's co-principals have not responded to interview requests. While the school has been cleaned, it won't be reopening until next Tuesday. In Dunedin for Checkpoint, Cortes Brunton, Tēnei.
It's 22 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Guilty verdicts in the trial of a police officer accused of raping his colleague were met with tears and anger today. The 29-year-old man has been on trial in the Auckland District Court for the past 2 weeks after pleading not guilty to indecent assault and sexual violation. He stood accused of groping a female officer during a boozy night with colleagues and later raping her as she slept in a Kirikiri motel last February. Today, after 4 hours of deliberations, the jury returned with unanimous guilty verdicts. Our court reporter Annika Smith was there and she joins me now. Annika, what happened?
Well, the verdicts this afternoon were met with sort of a stunned silence from those in the room, and things quickly changed into emotions as the defendant's family began to cry in the public gallery. They've sat through much of the trial over the past 2.5 weeks. The defendant himself in the dock was quite shocked. He appeared quite shocked. He sort of put his hand up to his face and then just stared at his family. Things changed when the jury was dismissed. So the man was taken back into the cells. The jury was thanked and dismissed. When the man was brought back in for the sentencing date to be set, he grew quite upset and angry. He swore and shouted in the dock, saying that the verdict, the trial, wasn't fair and crying. His family tried to console him from the public gallery, saying things would be fine and that the truth would eventually come out, but they couldn't get him to face the judge as Judge Evangelos Thomas set that sentencing date for April.
So what is the context to this verdict? What do we know about what happened?
Yeah, so over the past few weeks, we've heard that there was a group of police officers sent to Northland to work during Waitangi commemorations. They were all put up in a kiri motel for a few days. There was a boozy night. They were off duty, but they were drinking heavily. During that night, this man groped this female officer in an attempt to come onto her. She told the jury she denied him, said she wasn't interested and thought, that was that. She didn't make a fuss about it or anything. Then later on, CCTV footage shows the man going into the woman's room, and it's in this room that the woman said that she was raped. She woke up in pain to being raped, and the jury's verdict confirms that. So the man has been found guilty of indecent assault and sexual violation. Through the course of the trial, we sort of got a glimpse at this sort of behind the scenes of police conduct. Effectively, they were off duty, but they were drinking heavily. In one instance, they were sculling beer out of a hollowed out police baton. In another, they were playing a stripping game. And in two separate instances, a sergeant, which was effectively their boss, exposed himself twice to the group who were drinking.
So downtrout, took his pants down.
Completely exposed himself. There were women in the group. The women were a minority, but there were definitely women in the group. So that was sort of what we heard throughout the trial.
So, given that, what has been the police response and the history, and given the police history around sexual assault and rape?
So, yeah, many would know about the Louise Nicholas case. This comes to mind. There was a commission of inquiry and then effectively set into train a 10-year review. We went to police who said that this behaviour that came to light in this kiri incident was completely unacceptable. A few moments ago, I asked Superintendent Naila Hassan how the public could trust the police when this was happening behind the scenes.
Look, that's a valuable question, and what I can say is that it's incredibly concerning for police that any officer thought that the behaviour was acceptable. Although off duty, acting in a manner in which they did outside of work is not acceptable. I can assure the community that we have carried out a thorough internal investigation into the behaviour and kiri, and those involved are being held to account.
The police said that they carried out an employment investigation separate to a criminal investigation into the man's conduct, which found that 4 staff who were at that motel were identified as having breached the police's code of conduct. Now, 3 of them, we're told, were disciplined, but remain on active duty, and 1 no longer works in the force. We'll have more on this case when the man is sentenced in April.
Thanks, Annika. That's Annika Smith, our court reporter, who was there for the verdict. A 29-year-old police officer who was found guilty of raping a colleague. A South Auckland-based Māori warden says some people feel safer with armed police response teams on the roads, despite controversy over the teams. Māori justice advocates are submitting an urgent Waitangi Tribunal claim over the failure of the Crown to inform Māori about the 6-month trial of armed response teams, or ARTs, in counties Manukau, Waikato and Canterbury. They say the teams won't keep Māori safe, but some people in communities where gun violence is prevalent disagree. Mediana Johnson reports.
Shootings in South Auckland are not uncommon, and neither are the special police vehicles routinely patrolling counties Manukau in case of gun violence. That's according to Otahuhu Māori Wardens Chair Thomas Henry, who says it is frightening for locals.
Our elderly people, they're the ones that are feeling threatened in their communities and too frightened to speak out. We don't want any of our elderly people to feel unsafe.
He says they feel safer knowing there are armed officers on the streets.
They're feeling, I suppose, safer for themselves, but they don't want to say that in a clear picture because not wanting to get involved with what's happening.
But down south, Ōtautahi Māori Warden Chair Jackie Te Wani doesn't share the same view.
You never want it to be reality, but it looks like it has become reality. I can honestly say I do not feel comfortable with it becoming a reality. When you use a rifle, there's no comeback. Once you're shot, once you're gone, you're gone.
The armed response teams were introduced last October in response to the Christchurch mosque shooting, which left 51 people dead. Data released under the Official Information Act shows the teams were deployed 70 times a day in the first 5 weeks. That's 50 times the rate the Armed Offenders Squad were called out last year. The teams, armed with rifles and tasers, are designed to cut down response times to serious firearm incidents through preventative patrolling. But many Māori criticised the move, citing statistics that show Māori in Pacifica are 66% of those shot in the last 10 years. Claimant and justice advocate Julia Whaiporti says Māori trust in police is at an all-time low.
Why would we arm a force that Māori don't trust? So it's not for our safety, because the people that don't trust police are Māori. So that's something that, again, a decision that was made about us to happen to us without us.
Ms Whaiporti says the Crown breached the treaty by failing to even inform, let alone consult Māori about bringing in the armed response teams. Ms Te Wani agrees.
But there was a lot of work that should have been done tuatahi before we reach where we are now. Consult with our kaumātuas, talk on with iwi, hop on the marae, say that this is their plan, this is their idea of going forth. What do we think? How can we help?
The trial will finish up at the end of April. Mo te hōtaka o te Ahiahi, ko Miriana Johnson DNA.
And in a statement, Māori Deputy Commissioner Wally Homaha says in the last 5 months of the pilot, no armed response teams have fired any shots. He says the communities they are in will be consulted before police decide whether to continue their deployment. Very quickly, some feedback from Keith, who says he's a travelling sales rep and he sees so many coffee shops with open sugar bowls and jars. It seems a real germ trap, he says. I often see people do a second dunk with the spoon and lick the spoon. Bad health practice, whichever way you look at it, he says. He's contacted the Ministry of Health. Keith, it's called double dipping and it makes me feel just a tiny bit queasy. Thank you all for joining us. We will be back tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Dunedin residents are bracing for more positive COVID-19 cases after 150 close contacts of 2 local cases, including a schoolboy, are tested. Immigration New Zealand is promising a hardline approach to rounding up tourists who flout self-isolation rules, with 2 already due to be sent packing. Winston Peters has told the 80,000 New Zealanders overseas to hurry up if they want to get home before flights start grinding to a halt. And the police have revealed they investigated 4 officers for their behaviour during the Waitangi Day celebrations, in which a policewoman was raped by a colleague. Those are the headlines. Our next news will be at 7.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
And we may find situations where staff have to take time off more than once. There might be some time for themselves, but there might also be some time caring for family and for others.
Lately with me, Karen Hay, is your late night eye on the latest headlines.